Hello, sweet friend. My name is Maike, and in this video, I would like to have a chat about different Midori papers. I think a lot of us are familiar with the regular cream Midori paper that's in most of their notebooks and in the traveler's notebook inserts as well. But they also, I think 1 or 2 years ago, came out with the Midori thick notebooks. This paper is about twice as thick as their regular paper, and I did an initial first impressions video on this, but recently I've noticed a couple things, so I wanted to update you on how I've been feeling about this one. And then I was like, well, while we're at it, let's also get a Midori, and the camera doesn't want to focus, a Midori cotton notebook. So this is their Midori paper, but with 20% cotton pulp mixed into it, because I wanted to see, well, how does that compare to the other ones? And I'm mostly going to focus on the thick and the cotton, and this is just going to be here as a, well, I guess almost like a measuring stick, because most of us are so familiar with this paper, and so some of these qualities of these other notebooks will be visible once we compare it next to this. And I guess I want to start out with the thick, just simply because that inspired me to also buy the cotton notebook. And maybe now you can already tell that there's something that has upset me, if you can even call it that. Now, I'm using this thick notebook as a sketchbook because, well, I love drawing on Midori paper, and I thought, well, that would be so great to have the nice Midori paper in just a little bit thicker, and then the show through on the other side isn't as bad, and you get a little bit more of a clean slate. And that is definitely true. Even on this page, you can see, I mean, you can't see much from the other side. So this is the other side. So we have some pretty dark ink lines here, and I would say there's a faint show through. You can almost make out the bed shape right here, but not really, especially when you compare that to, let's see, do I have a good page to show you? Yeah, maybe this. So these are pretty dark lines, and you can definitely tell on the back, like you can trace this if you wanted to. So in that regard, this is great. But even in my initial first impression review, I felt like there is a different texture to this paper. It is slightly smoother, maybe it's a bit more coated. So yeah, watercolors and markers behave a little bit differently on here. And what I've now noticed is that sometimes the ink feathers, and it's not to the point where everything feathers all the time. And I will say that I haven't figured out quite yet what causes certain things to feather. So on this page, for example, it's very faint, and this might not be something that you would be offended by if this was your sketchbook. So obviously this is all very much personal preferences, but there's a little bit of feathering right here. Not too bad, not too bad. And I think that was the only thing on this drawing. It's just that little corner right there. There is some feathering on her, and I don't know if the camera is gonna struggle, but there's a couple more spaces right here, which, you know, could have been that I had my hand more on this part of the paper. At first I thought this was maybe because I was using the Diatramentus document ink, and that ink can sometimes feather on certain papers. It doesn't like every paper, or that I had been erasing so much, and that certainly could contribute to this as well, because I did erase quite a bit, especially on these two. Yeah, there's a little bit of feathering in the eye right here, but it is spotty. So then on this next page, for example, there was no feathering, even though this is the same ink color, and I think I did also some erasing before I went over with my ink lines. So like I said, that's why it took me so long to even notice. And then I wasn't quite sure if it was just this particular ink. Then I made this page. This is Wearing Goal Autumn Night After 1,000 Years, if I did remember that correctly. Yeah. It's this beautiful muted green with some gold shimmer, but I think this page did not get a lot of shimmer. There's a lot of more feathering on here if it wants to focus on this little guy. The head is feathering, the eyes are feathering. And that's to the point where, for me, that's no longer fun. There was some feathering right here. And then overall, I felt like the ink looked a bit streaky. Oh yeah, here's this little, I don't know if they're gnomes. I guess they're little gnome characters. This feather right here, this butterfly, and I barely did any erasing underneath here. So this page really confirmed to me that there was something going on with the feathering and that it was not just related to the Diatramentus ink or erasing. So yeah, there was that. And then was there anything else? I don't think so. We'll get to this part in a moment. I created comparison pages so we can look at some of those things in more detail. But yeah, it was to the point where I was feeling like, I don't know, now I'm always gonna go into a page thinking, is it gonna feather or not? And I don't like that. So I was like, hey, let's see what the cotton is like. And I picked this cute little square A5 square size, which I love. It's really fun, especially for a sketchbook. That's really neat because you can fill that relatively quickly. So this was just this is Sailor Tsurubami. There was also a little bit of feathering. Overall, I felt like the ink was darker than I'm used to. And then I decided to trace some of these, well, maybe we'll move the pens out of the way, trace some of the designs that I did here just to see what that was like. And maybe you can tell. So this is the cotton. The cotton is on the left. Right, left, always tricky. And the thick, and there's paper poking out. My goodness. Can we get a grip on this? Yeah, cotton on the left, thick on the right. And you can, yeah, you get a good view that the cotton is white, so you're losing out on that charming cream color that the other Midori papers have, but maybe that's a plus for you. And you can tell that the inks turn out a bit darker. So this green, the Autumn Night After 1,000 Years, is quite a bit darker than it was on here. But the application, especially in the filled out areas, is a little bit more even. It's like the ink just seeps into the paper a little bit more evenly, if that's a good way of describing it. But you get feathering. So there's a little bit of feathering on the little hat right there. And then I think that was it on this page. Yeah. So I was like, okay. That's interesting. But I love the way it feels going over this paper with fountain pens. Even though this is a little bit, it has, I think, a little bit more tooth than the regular Midori paper. It's not rough. Yeah, it's still very nice. And I actually prefer the feel of the pen on this paper over the regular Midori paper. So yeah, there's that. And then I played around with this dip pen ink that I have from Tono and Limbs, just playing around with that. Yeah, some more just drawings with a different fountain pen, because then I was like, well, maybe it is the Wearing Goal ink that is also just feathering, just like Diatramentus. Maybe that it's just temperamental in that way. This is Endless Alchemy molten bronze in a medium fine nib, so also a finer nib, and that performed beautifully. There was absolutely no feathering in this. I think the color comes out beautifully. The nib felt really wonderful on the paper. So there's that. So that was like, all right, maybe we had a little bit of a false start there. So I busted out a bigger nib size. This is a Sailor Medium with a Kobe ink, and here also no feathering. And again, it was really lovely to have the nib go over the paper. Well, now that I look at it, there is some feathering down here, which again, that would be something where it's maybe my hands. So maybe these papers are a little bit more susceptible to hand oils than the regular. And yeah, these are our comparison papers. So, or not papers, pages. I had done somewhere in here this playing with fountain pen ink, because now I wanted to know, some colors obviously turned out a little darker on here. Now I wanted to know what exactly we're dealing with. So this is Sailor 273, and I mixed it with water to bring out all this beautiful chromo shading. It's split, or not chromo shading, it's just when you mix it with water and use it almost like watercolor, it has these pinky magentas, but also there's yellow in there. Absolutely beautiful. So I did the same thing on the cotton paper, and maybe you can already tell there are more vibrant on the cotton paper, but you do get that lovely splitting happening as well. So it does do really well with that. What this showed me was, though, and I've mentioned that in a previous video, I thought I hadn't waited long enough to go over this part right here with the darker lines. And I thought it was still wet, and that made these lines bleed so much. Nope, that is probably the paper, because I didn't wait hardly at all. Well, I mean, I did let it dry, but it's not like I gave this a super long dry time. And even though it sort of like formed these weird blobbies because I was probably going too fast, it did not bleed, feather though. So yeah, this thick paper likes to feather, or causes more feathering. And now that I've seen that with the Waringo ink, with the Diatramentus ink, with this Sailor 273 ink, it makes me think that that is definitely the paper, and not because of my specific choices. Because also, again, it's not feathering on here. And then, like I was saying, I thought it would be fun to use the regular paper as a sort of comparison measuring stick. So of course it also showcases this splitting of the ink into multiple colors beautifully, and also no feathering when going over these parts with additional lines. So there's that. And oh yeah, I guess I can show you the color comparison with my these little gnomes. How do we do that? Maybe we do shuffle, shuffle, shuffle like this, maybe? Maybe take that belly band off. And then zoom you in, because I don't think I can hold those up. Yeah, all right. Okay, I think that somewhat works, at least for now. So we have regular Midori cream, the most vibrant in color, I would say. The color has a lot more warmth to it because of the cream color, and more saturation. So even though this thick Midori paper is also cream, the color is a bit more subdued. It doesn't have quite the saturation. This like olivey green that's showing through on the regular paper is not in the thick paper. And then the cotton, well, you do have the whiteness of the page, so there's a bit more of a different overall. It's not as warm leaning, the color, but it also looks quite a bit darker, and it just, you know, especially these two, I think, show that really well, what we're looking at there in terms of the color difference. So here we have this olive-toned green, and then here it is a bit more of a forest green. I mean, both are beautiful versions of this ink. This ink, by the way, I mean, what else other than little gnomey foresty characters can you draw with this? But yeah, very interesting, but absolutely no sign of feathering whatsoever. So again, this proved to me that this was definitely not a problem with the ink or the pen or anything. And then let's also compare side by side the flowers there. And I hope that this is useful. I know that not everybody who's into journaling also is doing artsy things, but I mean, you know, for ink swatching or for little doodles, little side projects, I think that's still interesting. And then, can you see? Yes, so here, for example, so this is the regular, the thick, and here is the cotton. And again, you can see this, the ink is much darker too, and a little bit more desaturated. It's a little less warm and inviting, maybe, than it is on this one. And then, yeah, these are actually somewhat close, I would say, the cotton and the regular cream. Yeah, I think here the main difference is between the regular cotton and what it looks like on the thick. And then the thick is having problems with feathering when layering things on top of each other. So that's quite interesting. And then I thought, okay, let's do one sort of like true comparison page, and I will use that to also explain what my takeaway is from all of this. So I realized that what I'm looking for, and maybe I'll zoom you back out for just a moment, and then I can focus back in on certain things. And our little friend, little kitty friend, will sit that right there so he can see. What I'm looking for really in a sketchbook is that I can work with the Diatramentis document inks, because those are my favorite waterproof inks, and I know that they don't work on every paper, especially the colored ones can lose all of their saturation on certain papers, or they feather. So I wanted document inks, I wanted to be able to use markers and that they're not super streaky, and I want to use watercolor. So this is what I tested here as a sort of finale. And so maybe we'll start with the regular paper. So this is my favorite, just to do a jumping to the end there. So I created this mix right here with the Diatramentis green, urban sienna, and sepia to make this sort of muddy document mix. It's like a muddy olive green. That's what that looks like on here. Then this is because and then I was like, well, the mixing, maybe there's something that happens. So let's also use one document ink just straight from the bottle. So here's the urban sienna by itself, one of my favorite Diatramentis document inks. And then here we have another document inks mix, and then using some markers there, which, you know, water-based markers always look a little bit streaky, but overall, you know, performing fine. And then I did this bigger flower here just to have a bigger area to fill out. Again, a little bit of streaky texture because of it being a water-based tumble marker, but not too bad, you know, for a sketchbook. And then here I used the document ink for the lines and then some watercolor. That's what that looks like. Obviously performed as usual. There's nothing bleeding through. You do have the show through. You have a little bit of warping from the watercolor, but you know. And these are not the greatest colors ever, but that's more my mixing than it has to do with the paper. So this is what I want. Now, compare that with the thick. My muddy mix looks even more muddy. The writing is okay, but in the big swatch, it definitely has sort of a gray cast to it. And, you know, of course, I mixed a very muddy color, so I am aware of that. But yeah, it looks just a little sad or sadder. Same with the Urban Sienna, just has a little less of a zing to it. Again, the writing is better than the swatch. Then we get to the markers. They performed pretty well, I would say. That's very comparable to the regular paper. And then here in the bigger flower, it looked maybe a little bit more streaky, but not that much. For me, one of the biggest differences was the watercolor, and I don't know if it's gonna show up on the camera quite, because when I look at this on the camera, I think it looks better on camera, but I feel like the watercolor has this chalky finish to it. It's just a little duller. It's just the way it sits on the paper, I think, that is different. Yeah, I think watercolor on this thick paper is my least favorite of all of these options. And maybe I can show you, I did these other characters with some watercolor over top. No, I went too far. These. And like especially here, maybe you can see that sort of chalky finish that I was talking about. Yeah, it's just not the best for watercolor for sure. And then let's get the cotton paper out. The document inks did fine. I mean, I do also think that they don't, especially this muddy color, still looks the best on the regular, but the Urban Sienna looks fine. Even the swatch, the big swatch, looks fine and looks very comparable to the regular. The watercolor, I think it's not as chalky as it is on the thick, but it's not, I don't know, you would think that because it has cotton pulp in it, which is usually when it comes to watercolor paper, like actual watercolor paper, is considered a sign of quality. If you want to have really nice watercolor paper, you pick one that is 100% cotton. But on this, it didn't really do it for me. I don't know. And again, I don't know if you can tell on camera. I feel like on camera, this looks the worst. But really, it's just a little chalky. I don't know. And then the markers did well, though. That's, maybe this is the streakiest of all the flowers, and I'm not sure, maybe I was just rushing it, maybe, but yeah. It doesn't show up as much on the little characters, so maybe if you were to just do stuff like this, then it's not such a big deal. Okay, so what does that mean? I think, for me personally, the regular Midori cream paper wins out. I think this is going to be my sketchbook paper, at least for the near future. I just really want the reliability that I get from this paper. For me personally, the Diatramentis document inks are important, and I want to play around more with mixing my own colors with the document inks. So for them to show up true to color and not lose any of their saturation is a really big deal. And again, that might not be a big deal for you. Maybe you just use the black ink and that tends to perform really well, regardless of paper, or at least it seems to be less finicky in my experience than some of these colored inks. But yeah, this is a big deal. I think in terms of the markers, I could go with any of these, really. I don't think that there's much of a difference. Again, maybe the cotton is a little bit more streaky, but also more often than not, I use it in this kind of way to color in a drawing rather than having big areas of color. And overall, I just don't like wondering whether or not my ink will feather. The colored inks, that is, beyond just the document inks. And as I was showing you in the cotton paper, it doesn't happen all the time. Like even on this page, it only happened just this teensy tiny bit on her neck there. And overall, this was a very enjoyable experience. So I think in terms of just the looking at the end product, I wouldn't, you know, discount this cotton paper for the feathering. However, just even like knowing that it might feather is to me a little bit like I don't like that. I just want to get into the zone and just have a wonderful time when I sit down and sketch. So there's that. And yeah, I mean, in terms of the watercolor, I feel like the thick paper was the most disappointing because it just looks so chalky and it's just not very fun. And I think this was also the worst offender when it comes to feathering. And so for me, I think I will archive this book. Maybe I'll return back to it for some other materials, or I just don't care. But right now, the feathering is just a little too much, and I just don't like how much it swallows the colors. So this is gonna get archived. It's just not the experience I want right now. And then, yeah, we'll keep my general Midori, regular paper just as is. This, because it's not bad enough, I will still play with this. I think I'm gonna do a lot of maybe this kind of thing where I just use it for inky play, more so than, you know, drawing, because I also think that, yeah, certain colors show up a little darker than they usually do, but that might also be a benefit when playing with inks that are a little bit lighter, or especially like lighter chromo shaders, you know, then you can actually see some of those effects really well. So yeah, that's gonna be good. And with as small as this is, that's kind of fun to just sit down if you have 5 or 10 minutes to just do a little square of some fun doodles. Yeah, that's gonna be nice. So this is gonna be a standby, probably heavily focused on inks, and then we're sticking with the good old regular green paper. Sometimes it is that way where you just, you know, you play around and you test out and you just find that what you started out with was the best solution to begin with. Let me know if you have tried any of the other Midori papers, the cotton, the thick. What's your experience? Do you have a different favorite and why? I'm always curious. And with all of these things, of course, it depends on what you want out of your sketchbook, the materials that you're using. Oh, and I will say that this is probably, the cotton is probably the best for colored pencil or charcoal or just pencil in general, any dry medium, because again, that paper has a little bit more tooth. So that's probably lovely in here. So there's that. All right, I hope this was useful information. Yeah, share with me, what has your experience been with Midori paper? Do you have a favorite and why? What do you like to use it with? And other than that, until next time, happy journaling.